Tell us again, Miss Miller, what did you see? The police officer's voice was a low drone, a monotonous counterpoint to the frantic symphony still playing in my head. The screech of tires, the impossible thud of metal on metal, the shattering glass. I hugged myself tighter, the thin fabric of my nurse's scrubs doing nothing to ward off the chill that had settled deep in my bones. It was more than the shock of the accident. It was a cold, creeping dread. I already told you. I stammered, my eyes fixed on a crack in the pavement. A car ran the red light. It hit the black sedan, and then it just drove off. It was a lie. A stupid, reckless lie. I knew exactly who had been behind the wheel of that speeding car. It was my ex-boyfriend, Mark, his face a mask of drunken fury as he'd screamed my name from the driver's side just moments before impact. But standing there, with the flashing red and blue lights painting streaks across the rain-slick street, I couldn't say his name. I couldn't be the reason he went to jail, not after everything. The officers exchanged a look of weary impatience. My story was thin, and they knew it. But the other driver, the man from the black sedan, was still unconscious, being loaded into an ambulance. Go ahead and drop a subscribe on the channel, and let us know what time it is where you are in the comments before we continue. The man was a stranger, but in that split second, I'd made a choice. I chose to protect Mark from the consequences of his own rage, and in doing so, I'd thrown this unknown man to the wolves. A wave of guilt washed over me, so strong it nearly buckled my knees. My shift at the clinic had ended hours ago, a grueling 12 hours of taking temperatures and drawing blood. I was exhausted, my savings were dwindling, and my landlord had just slapped an eviction notice on my door. This accident was just the rotten cherry on top of a truly terrible life Sunday. I just wanted to go home, curl up under my threadbare blanket, and pretend this day never happened. We'll need you to come down to the station to give a formal statement, the officer said, his tone leaving no room for argument. As they led me to a squad car, I glanced back at the scene. The black sedan was a mangled wreck, its sleek, expensive-looking frame twisted into an unnatural shape. A dark, imposing man in a tailored suit was speaking urgently into a phone, his gaze sweeping over the chaos with an unnerving stillness. His eyes met mine for a fleeting second, and the intensity in them sent another shiver down my spine. It was a look that didn't just see me, it felt like it was cataloging every mistake I'd ever made, starting with the lie I had just told. Days later, the incident had faded into the background noise of my chaotic life. The eviction was looming, my bank account was a joke, and I was working double shifts just to stay afloat. I had pushed the memory of the crash, the lie, and the intense stranger into a dusty corner of my mind. It was easier that way. Then the black envelope appeared, slipped under my apartment door. There was no stamp, no return address, just my name, Clara Miller, written in elegant, sharp calligraphy on the front. My heart hammered against my ribs. This wasn't a bill or another warning from my landlord. This felt different, dangerous. With trembling fingers, I tore it open. Inside was a single piece of thick, cream-colored cardstock. The message was brief, printed in the same stark black ink. Your loyalty has been noted. It will be rewarded. Beneath the words was an address. A penthouse suite at the Empyrean, the most luxurious and exclusive hotel in the city, and a time, 8 p.m. tonight. A cold dread, colder than the one I felt on the night of the accident, seeped into my veins. This had to be connected to the man in the sedan. My lie hadn't gone unnoticed after all. It had been observed, evaluated, and apparently approved of. But by whom? And what do they want from me? The thought of ignoring it was tempting. I could pretend I never got it, move out, disappear. But the precision of the delivery, the sheer audacity of it, told me that these were not people you could simply ignore. They knew my name. They knew where I lived. What else did they know? The promise of a reward was enticing, a siren song to someone as desperate as I was. But I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the soul, that accepting a reward from someone who drove a car like that, who had men in suits making calls at accident scenes, would come at a price far higher than I could possibly afford. I spent the rest of the day in a state of escalating panic. Every shadow seemed to lengthen. Every footstep in the hallway sounded like a threat. The address on the card was a brand on my mind, a crossroads I was being forced to approach. One path led back to my crumbling life of debt and desperation. The other led to the Empyrean, to a world of wealth and power I couldn't begin to comprehend, and to the man whose intense gaze had already seared itself into my memory. As the clock ticked closer to 8 p.m., I knew I had no real choice. My curiosity, my desperation, and a terrifying sliver of hope were dragging me toward that penthouse, toward the consequences of my lie. I had to know. I had to see who was on the other side of that door and what kind of reward loyalty earned in their world. That evening, I stood before the polished oak doors of the penthouse at the Empyrean, my reflection in the gleaming which showing a woman I barely recognized. I had traded my worn-out scrubs for the only nice dress I owned, a simple navy sheath that suddenly felt flimsy and inadequate. My hands were clammy, and my heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. I had taken a cab I couldn't afford to a place I didn't belong, all because of a cryptic note from a man I'd helped by lying. Taking a deep, shuddering breath, I raised my hand and knocked. The door swung open instantly, so quickly I flinched. A man built like a refrigerator in a perfectly tailored suit stood there, his face an impassive mask. He said nothing, simply stepped aside and gestured for me to enter. The penthouse was breathtaking. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed a panoramic view of the city glittering below like a carpet of diamonds. The air was scented with something expensive, like leather and aged whiskey. The space was cavernous, decorated in minimalist shades of gray and black, dominated by modern art and furniture that probably cost more than my entire nursing education. And there, standing by the window with his back to me, was a figure silhouetted against the city lights. He was tall and broad-shouldered, radiating an aura of absolute power and control that filled the entire room. He didn't turn around. "Miss Miller," he said, his voice a deep, smooth baritone that rumbled through the silence. It was low, calm, yet held an undercurrent of authority that was impossible to ignore. "Thank you for coming." He turned slowly, and my breath caught in my throat. It was him, the man from the accident scene, the one with the intense, penetrating eyes. Up close, he was even more striking. Chiseled features, a sharp jawline dusted with dark stubble, and hair as black as a raven's wing. He looked at me, and that same feeling from the night of the crash washed over me. The feeling of being completely and utterly seen. There was no kindness in his gaze, but there was an unsettling curiosity, as if he were trying to solve a puzzle. "You lied," he stated, not as a question, but as a fact. He took a step closer, and I had to fight the urge to step back. "You lied to the police to protect a man who moments before had tried to run you off the road." "Why?" My throat was dry. I don't know what you're talking about." He smiled, a slow, predatory curve of his lips that held no humor. "Don't you? My people are very thorough, Clara. They know all about Mark Peterson. They know about his temper, his drinking, his obsession with you. And they know it was his car that hit mine. He was circling me now, like a shark sizing up its prey. You had every reason to give his name to the police. It would have solved a significant problem for you. But you didn't. You protected him, a worthless man who deserved none of your loyalty. Instead, you gave that loyalty to a stranger. To me, he stopped directly in front of me, so close I could feel the heat radiating from his body. He lifted a hand and gently tucked a stray strand of hair behind my ear, his touch sending a jolt of electricity through me. "That kind of loyalty is rare," he murmured, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "And in my world, it is the most valuable currency there is. My name is Julian Romano, and I always reward loyalty." Julian Romano. The name hit me like a physical blow. It wasn't just a name, it was a headline. The Romano family was notorious, a crime syndicate that had its tendrils wrapped around the city's underbelly for decades. Julian was the head, the new boss, whispered to be even more ruthless and intelligent than his father. I wasn't just in a room with a rich, powerful man. I was in the den of the city's most dangerous predator, and I had just admitted to lying on his behalf. The promise of a reward suddenly sounded like a death sentence. A reward. I managed to choke out, my voice barely a whisper. The air in the penthouse felt thick, heavy with unspoken threats and the sheer weight of his presence. Julian's dark eyes never left mine, their intensity pinning me in place. He seemed to find my fear amusing. "That's what I said," he replied calmly, moving back toward the vast window. He gestured to the city below. "This city, it's a difficult place to live, Clara, especially for someone like you. Honest, hardworking, alone." He said the last word with a particular emphasis that made my skin crawl. He knew. Of course he knew. He knew about my overdue rent, my empty cupboards, the crushing weight of my student loans. "Your ex-boyfriend, Mark, is no longer a problem," Julian continued, his tone casual, as if discussing the weather. "He's been encouraged to relocate. Far away. He won't be bothering you again." The finality in his voice was chilling. I didn't dare ask what encouraged meant. I wasn't sure I wanted to know. The mix of terror and relief that flooded me was sickening. A part of me, the part that had flinched every time my phone rang for the past 6 months, was profoundly grateful. But the other part, the part that still believed in right and wrong, was horrified. My lie had set this in motion. I had inadvertently handed Julian Romano a license to interfere in my life. "In your financial difficulties," he went on, turning to face me again, a folder now in his hand that I hadn't seen before. He tossed it onto a glass coffee table. "Taken care of." I stared at the folder, then back at him, bewildered. "What does that mean?" He gave me that cold, humorless smile again. "It means your apartment is now owned by a holding company I control. Your rent is canceled indefinitely. Your student loans have been paid in full. There's also a new bank account in your name. The balance should be sufficient to allow you to quit your second job." I felt dizzy, like the world was tilting on its axis. In the span of a few sentences, he had wiped away every single source of my crushing anxiety. He had solved all my problems with the flick of a wrist. It was everything I had ever dreamed of, a fantasy of sudden, unburdened freedom. But it felt like a trap. A beautiful, gilded cage was being constructed around me, and the door was swinging shut. "Why?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Why would you do all this for me?" "For a lie." He closed the distance between us once more. "I told you, loyalty is everything. You showed me loyalty when you had no reason to. You chose to protect a stranger over punishing an enemy. That demonstrates a character I find valuable." He reached out, his fingers brushing against my jaw, his touch surprisingly gentle yet possessive. "I am not a man who accepts gifts without giving something far greater in return. You gave me your loyalty, Clara, and in return, I am giving you my protection." My mind was screaming. Protection? This felt like ownership. He hadn't just solved my problems. He had absorbed them. He owned my apartment. He controlled my finances. He had banished my ex. He had systematically removed every piece of my old, miserable life and was now offering me a new one, a life where I would be completely dependent on him. The fear was still there, a cold knot in my stomach, but beneath it, something else was stirring. A dangerous, seductive sense of security. The thought of not having to worry about money, about Mark, about being evicted. It was intoxicating. I had been treading water for so long, and he was offering me a life raft. A life raft made of solid gold, captained by a pirate. "What do you want from me?" I whispered, the real question hanging unspoken in the air. "I want you to stay," he said simply. "Here, with me, where I can ensure your protection is absolute." It wasn't a request. It was a statement of fact. My reward for loyalty wasn't just money or the removal of threats. The reward was him. And I was beginning to understand that with Julian Romano, there was no refusing a gift. The penthouse became my gilded cage. The first few weeks were a blur of disorientation and luxury I couldn't process. I woke up in a guest bedroom with silk sheets and a view that most people only see in movies. A silent, efficient housekeeper named Mrs. Gable brought me breakfast on a tray, her face perpetually neutral. My worn-out clothes were replaced with a wardrobe of designer outfits, each one chosen with an unnerving understanding of my size and taste. Julian had given me a credit card with no limit, a phone with a single number programmed into it, and the freedom to do anything I wanted, as long as it was within the confines of the building. His head of security, a mountain of a man named Marcus, was my constant shadow anytime I dared to venture down to the hotel's gym or spa. It was a life of opulent imprisonment. Julian himself was a phantom. He was gone for long stretches, conducting business I didn't ask about. But even when he wasn't there, his presence was everywhere. In the scent of his cologne that lingered in the living room, in the way the staff deferred to his unspoken rules, in the absolute security of the building that felt both comforting and confining. When he was home, the tension in the penthouse ratcheted up 1,000%. Our conversations were stilted and strange. He would watch me from across the vast living room as I tried to read, his dark eyes following my every move. He'd ask me about my day, but it felt less like a question and more like an interrogation, a data-gathering exercise. "Did you enjoy the spa, Clara? Was the food to your liking? Did anyone speak to you?" He was trying to understand me, to figure out what made the woman who had lied for him tick. And in spite of my fear, I found myself watching him, too. I saw the exhaustion etched around his eyes when he returned late at night. I saw the way his shoulders tensed when he took calls in his office, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl. I saw glimpses of a man carrying an impossible weight, a man encased in a shell of power and ruthlessness. One night, a thunderstorm raged outside, mirroring the storm in my own head. I couldn't sleep. I found him in the living room, standing by the window, a glass of amber liquid in his hand, watching the lightning split the sky. He didn't seem surprised to see me. "Can't sleep?" he asked, his voice softer than usual. I nodded, wrapping my arms around myself. "The storm." He took a slow sip of his drink. "My father hated storms. He said they were unpredictable, a variable you can't control." It was the first time he had ever mentioned his family. It felt like a crack in his armor. "He taught me to control everything you can, so that when the storms come, you're prepared." "Is that what you do?" I asked quietly. "Control everything?" His gaze shifted from the storm to me. "It's the only way to survive. The only way to protect what's yours." His eyes held mine, and the meaning was unmistakable. I was his, something he had to control, to protect. In that moment, the line between captor and protector blurred completely. The fear was still there, a constant companion, but it was now tangled with a new, terrifying emotion. A flicker of connection, a dangerous curiosity about the man behind the monster. He took a step closer, the scent of whiskey and rain on his clothes. He raised a hand, his thumb tracing the line of my jaw. "You are not a variable, Clara," he murmured, his voice a low rumble. "You are a constant. The one thing I did not plan for, but the one thing I will never let go of." The intensity in his eyes was overwhelming, a promise and a threat all at once. And God help me, a part of me didn't want him to. I was starting to feel safe in the heart of the storm. My new life, suspended in the silent luxury of the penthouse, began to feel strangely normal. The initial terror subsided into a low-grade hum of anxiety, a constant awareness of the gilded bars of my cage. Julian continued his pattern of phantom-like appearances, engaging me in those tense, observational conversations before disappearing back into the city's criminal underworld. I learned about him in fragments, piecing together the man from the scraps he let slip. I learned he preferred his coffee black, that he had a scar above his eyebrow from a childhood fight with his brother, and that he found modern art pretentious but owned it as an investment. These were small, human details that felt wildly out of place with the ruthless reputation that preceded him. He, in turn, was learning me. He knew I loved old movies, that I missed the simple act of grocery shopping, and that I talked in my sleep when I was stressed. His knowledge of me was both unnerving and, in a strange way, intimate. The balance of our strange cohabitation was shattered one Tuesday afternoon. I was in the penthouse library, a room I'd fallen in love with, when Marcus, Julian's stoic head of security, entered. His usual impassive expression was gone, replaced by a grim urgency. "Miss Miller, Mr. Romano needs you to stay away from the windows. There's been a situation." My blood ran cold. A situation? What happened? He hesitated, his jaw tight. "There was an incident at one of Mr. Romano's warehouses on the docks. A rival family." The words hung in the air, heavy and lethal. A rival family. This wasn't some abstract business negotiation. This was a mob war. The bubble of safety Julian had built around me had just been pierced. For the next 24 hours, the penthouse was a fortress on high alert. Men in dark suits, all of them armed and radiating a dangerous calm, moved silently through the rooms. Calls were made in hushed, coded language. I was a ghost in my own home, invisible and irrelevant to the storm that had broken over Julian's empire. He didn't come home that night. I sat on the silk sheets of my bed, staring at the door, every creak of the building sending a fresh jolt of fear through me. Was he hurt? Was he? It was a thought I couldn't complete. And the scariest part was the raw, undeniable panic I felt at the idea of him being gone. He was my captor, the architect of my imprisonment, but he was also the man who had erased my fears and named himself my protector. The lines were so blurred now, I couldn't tell where one began and the other ended. He finally returned just before dawn. He walked into the living room where I was waiting, and my heart stopped. His suit was disheveled. There was a fresh cut on his cheek, and his face was a mask of cold, lethal fury. But when his eyes landed on me, the fury softened for a fraction of a second, replaced by a flicker of relief. "You're okay," he said, his voice rough with exhaustion. It wasn't a question. I stood up, my legs shaky. "Are you?" He walked towards me, ignoring my question. He stopped just inches away, his gaze sweeping over me, as if to confirm for himself that I was unharmed. He reached up and cupped my face in his hands, his palms rough against my skin. The weariness in his eyes was profound. "They know about you, Clara," he said, his voice low and grave. "The O'Malleys. They think you're my weakness." The word weakness hit me harder than any physical blow. To these animals, I wasn't a person. I was leverage. a tool to be used against him. They sent a message, he continued, his thumb stroking my cheek. They failed. They won't get a second chance. The threat in his voice was absolute. This wasn't just business anymore. They had made it personal. They had aimed for me, and in doing so, they had unleashed the monster I had only seen glimpses of. He looked into my eyes, and the last of his armor seemed to fall away. I won't let anything happen to you, he vowed, his voice thick with an emotion I couldn't name. It was more than possessiveness. It was a raw, desperate promise. In that moment, I understood. The gilded cage wasn't to keep me in. It was to keep the world out. And the world was far more terrifying than the man standing in front of me. The incident with the O'Malley family changed everything. The tense but quiet atmosphere of the penthouse was replaced by a palpable state of war. The number of guards doubled. My gilded cage became a fortress. I was no longer allowed to leave the penthouse floor for any reason. The spa, the gym, the library, they were all off limits. My world had shrunk to the opulent square footage of Julian's home. The threat was no longer an abstract concept. It was a living, breathing entity. They knew about me. They thought I was his weakness. The thought sent a perpetual chill down my spine. The days that followed were suffocatingly long. Julian was gone more than ever, and when he was home, he was a ghost of a man, consumed by strategy and vengeance. He'd paced the length of the living room for hours, a phone pressed to his ear, his voice a low, lethal hum of commands. We barely spoke, but his eyes were constantly on me. He'd watch me from across the room with a look of intense, brooding worry, as if I might dematerialize if he looked away. It was during this time that I started to see the true cost of his power. It was a life of isolation, of constant vigilance, of sleeping with one eye open. He had everything a man could want: wealth, power, influence, but he had no peace. He was as much a prisoner as I was, trapped in a fortress of his own making. One evening, he found me on the balcony, staring out at the city lights, which now felt mocking in their freedom. He came to stand beside me, the silence stretching between us, thick with unspoken tensions. "I'm sorry for this, Clara," he said, his voice quiet. I turned to him, surprised. Julian Romano did not apologize. "I never wanted you to be a part of this. You didn't give me much of a choice," I replied, a bit more sharply than I intended. A flicker of something, regret, perhaps, crossed his face. "No," he admitted. "I didn't. When I first brought you here, it was simpler. I saw your loyalty, and I wanted to reward it, to protect you from the petty miseries of your life." He looked out at the city. "I've spent my life eliminating threats, controlling outcomes. I thought I could control this. I thought I could just remove your problems and keep you safe, separate from all this." He gestured vaguely at the city, at his life. But I was arrogant. I brought a songbird into a snake pit, thinking I could command the snakes not to bite. The metaphor was surprisingly poetic and painfully accurate. "The O'Malleys are old enemies," he continued, his tone hardening. "They're cornered animals, desperate. They see you, and they don't see a person. They see a pressure point, a way to break me." He finally looked at me, his dark eyes searching mine. "They have underestimated me, and they have made the fatal mistake of threatening what is mine." There was again that possessive, absolute declaration. But this time, it didn't sound like a claim of ownership. It sounded like a sacred vow. It didn't make me feel like property. It made me feel cherished, defended. He saw the shift in my expression. "I'm going to end this, Clara," he said, his voice dropping to a raw whisper. "Tonight, and when it's over, you will never have to be afraid again. I'm going to burn their world to the ground for even daring to learn your name." He leaned in, his forehead resting against mine, his eyes closing for a brief second. It was the most vulnerable I had ever seen him. A man of immense power, brought to a standstill by his fear for me. In that moment, under the indifferent stars, my own fear was eclipsed by a powerful, terrifying realization. I wasn't just his protected captive anymore. I was falling in love with Julian Romano, and I was terrified not that he would leave, but that he wouldn't come back. The night Julian went to end it was the longest of my life. He left without a word, just a long, intense look that was both a promise and a farewell. The penthouse, once a symbol of luxurious confinement, became a tomb of silence. Marcus and two other guards stood posted outside my bedroom door. The stillness was maddening. Every tick of the clock was a hammer blow against my sanity. I paced the floor, my mind a canvas for 1,000 gruesome possibilities. I pictured Julian, the cut on his cheek, the cold fury in his eyes. I imagined the O'Malleys, the desperate, cornered animals he described. I had no illusions about who Julian was. He was a killer. He was the head of a criminal empire. But he was also the man who saw a flicker of loyalty in a terrified woman and decided it was worth protecting above all else. He was the man who had shown me more consideration and fierce devotion than anyone in my entire life. The morality of it was a tangled knot I couldn't begin to unravel. How could I be falling for a man like him? How could I be sitting here, praying for the safe return of a mob boss who was, at this very moment, likely engaged in acts of horrific violence? But I was. My fear for him was a physical ache in my chest, a cold, hard dread that overshadowed everything else. Dawn was breaking, painting the sky in pale shades of gray and pink, when I heard the front door open. My heart leaped into my throat. I ran from the bedroom, past the stoic guards, and into the living room. Julian stood just inside the doorway. He was alive. He was splattered with dirt and something dark that I knew wasn't mud. His expensive suit was torn at the shoulder, and he looked utterly exhausted, but he was standing. He was whole. His eyes found mine across the room, and the relief that washed over his face was so profound it was like watching a dam break. He took a staggering step towards me, and then another. I met him halfway, crashing into his chest. He wrapped his arms around me, holding me so tightly I could barely breathe. He buried his face in my hair, and I felt a shudder run through his powerful frame. "It's over," he murmured into my ear, his voice thick and raspy. "It's finished. They're gone." I clung to him, inhaling the scent of him, rain, metal, and something uniquely Julian. The violence of his night was on him, a palpable aura, but in his arms I felt nothing but an overwhelming sense of safety. The storm had passed. He had weathered it, and he had come back to me. He pulled back just enough to look at my face, his hands framing it gently. His dark eyes, usually so guarded and cold, were wide open and filled with a raw, unguarded emotion that stole my breath. "Clara," he began, his voice cracking slightly. "While I was out there tonight, the only thing I could think about was you. The only thing that mattered was getting back here. To you. This wasn't the calculating crime lord or the possessive protector. This was a man stripped bare, admitting his deepest vulnerability. I brought you into this world against your will," he said, his thumbs stroking my cheeks. "I trapped you in this cage, telling myself it was for your own good, for your protection. But the truth is, I think it was for mine. I was the one who was trapped in a life of darkness and violence. And then you appeared. This light, this loyalty." He swallowed hard, his gaze unwavering. "I love you, Claire Miller. I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to be the man you deserve. But I will spend the rest of my life learning. I don't want you to be my protected captive anymore. I want you to be my partner, my wife, my equal." The words hung in the air between us, more powerful than any gunshot, more binding than any contract. Wife, partner, equal. He was offering me not just a place in his world, but a place at its center. He was offering me all of him, the monster and the man, and asking for all of me in return. Tears streamed down my face, but they weren't tears of fear or sadness. They were tears of overwhelming, impossible joy. My lie on that. Rainy Street had led me down a terrifying path, but it had led me here, to this man, to this moment, to a future I never could have imagined. Yes, I whispered, my voice choked with emotion. Yes, Julian. A brilliant, genuine smile finally broke across his face, transforming his harsh features into something breathtakingly handsome. He leaned down and kissed me, and it was nothing like I expected. It wasn't possessive or demanding. It was a kiss full of relief, of reverence, of promises made, and a future beginning. The cage was gone. The door was open, and I was choosing to stay, not as a prisoner, but as a queen. The aftermath of Julian's war with the O'Malleys was swift and silent. Their names vanished from the city's whispers, their territories absorbed, their memory erased as if they had never existed. The palpable tension that had suffocated the penthouse evaporated overnight, replaced by a quiet, profound calm. The extra guards disappeared, and Marcus returned to his role as a silent, watchful presence rather than an armed warden. The world outside the windows no longer felt like a threat waiting to pounce. It was just a city, and it was a city Julian commanded. Our life began to find a new rhythm. Julian's proposal wasn't a fleeting, emotional declaration. It was a foundational shift in our reality. He began to deliberately dismantle the cage he had built. He took me out of the penthouse, not to the spa or the gym, but out into the city. Our first date was to a small, unassuming Italian restaurant in a neighborhood I'd never been to. The owner greeted Julian with a reverence that bordered on fear, but to us, he was just a man ensuring we had the best table and the finest wine. As we ate, Julian told me about his father, about the weight of the legacy he'd inherited and the constant pressure to be stronger and more ruthless than his enemies. He didn't make excuses for his life, but he explained it. He was chipping away at the walls around himself, letting me see the man forced to become a monster. In return, I told him about my childhood, about my dream of being a nurse, about the simple, quiet life I had once craved. He listened with an attentiveness that made me feel like I was the most fascinating person in the world. He didn't see my old life as miserable or petty, as he once called it. He saw the strength it had taken me to survive it. He started including me. One afternoon, he had me sit in on a meeting with his financial advisors. I didn't understand half of the jargon about portfolios and acquisitions, but he would occasionally look to me, catch my eye, and give a subtle wink. He introduced me simply as Clara, my fiancée, a title that sent a thrill through me every time. The men in suits, who once would have looked right through me, now nodded with deference. I wasn't just the boss's girl. I was being presented as a new center of power. He was showing his world that my voice mattered, that my presence was permanent. He took me to see a new apartment, a stunning brownstone with a private garden. "The penthouse is a fortress," he said, holding my hand as we stood in the empty living room. "I want to give you a home." It wasn't about security. It was about building a life. He even did something I never thought possible. He helped me get my nursing license reinstated. He made a few calls, and the bureaucratic hurdles that had seemed insurmountable simply vanished. "You saved lives long before you ever met me, Clara," he said when I stared at the official document in disbelief. "It's a part of who you are. I would never take that away from you." The lie I told on that rain-slick street felt like a lifetime ago. It was the catalyst, the single wrong turn that had led me to the right place. I had lied to protect a stranger, and that stranger had become my entire world. He wasn't a simple hero, and I wasn't a simple damsel. We were two complicated, damaged people who had found an unlikely sanctuary in each other. He had been drawn to my loyalty, and I had been drawn to his strength. Standing in our future home, with my hand in his, I looked at Julian Romano, the mafia boss, the killer, my protector, my love, and I knew I was exactly where I was supposed to be. The loyalty he had rewarded was nothing compared to the loyalty I now felt for him. A fierce, unbreakable bond forged in danger and sealed with a promise. Our wedding was not a grand affair broadcast to the city. It was a private ceremony, held in the half-finished living room of our brownstone, with only Mrs. Gable and a very nervous-looking Marcus as witnesses. Julian wore a dark suit, and I wore a simple white dress he'd had commissioned for me. There were no flashing cameras, no powerful guests, just the two of us making a solemn vow in the place we would build our life. It was perfect. Moving from the sterile opulence of the penthouse to the warm, inviting space of the brownstone was like taking my first breath of fresh air after being underwater for too long. We filled it not just with expensive furniture, but with our life. I chose the colors for the walls. He filled the bookshelves with my favorite classic novels alongside his business texts. I planted roses in the garden. He built a state-of-the-art security system to watch over them. It was a partnership in every sense of the word. I did go back to nursing, part-time, at a community clinic Julian's charitable foundation, now generously funded. The staff knew who my husband was. It was impossible not to, but they treated me with a cautious respect. They saw a woman who genuinely cared about her patients, who wasn't afraid to get her hands dirty. For me, it was a vital link to the person I used to be, a reminder of the quiet strength I had always possessed. My life with Julian was a study in contrasts. One day, I would be sterilizing needles and comforting a child with a fever, and that night, I would be sitting beside Julian at a dinner with men whose names were whispered in fear, my presence a clear and silent statement of his power. I learned to navigate his world, not as a participant in its violence, but as its queen. I became the human face of his empire, the soft power to his iron fist. His men, who once saw me as a potential liability, now saw me as their boss's greatest strength. They saw how his face softened when I walked into a room, how he deferred to my opinion on matters outside of his usual violent domain. They understood that to cross me was far more dangerous than to cross him. Julian, in turn, found a peace he had never known. The haunted look in his eyes began to fade, replaced by a quiet contentment. He had found something to protect that wasn't territory or a business interest, but a person, a home, a love. He had spent his life controlling everything, but he learned to cede control to me in the small, intimate spaces of our life together. He learned that true power wasn't just about inspiring fear. It was about inspiring loyalty, a lesson I had apparently taught him on the day we met. One evening, months after we were married, we were in the garden, the scent of my roses heavy in the air. He was watching me with that intense, focused gaze that had once terrified me, but now felt like the warmest embrace. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked quietly. That night, lying to the police, I looked up from the flower bed I was tending, my hands covered in soil. I thought about the Clara who had stood trembling on that street corner, her life in shambles. I thought about the desperate, stupid lie she had told, a lie born of a misplaced sense of duty to a man who didn't deserve it, a lie that had inadvertently saved the life of a man who would, in turn, save hers. I smiled, a genuine, happy smile. It was the best mistake I ever made. He came to me, wiping a smudge of dirt from my cheek with his thumb. "It wasn't a mistake, Clara," he said, his voice low and certain. "It was fate." and I'll spend the rest of my life being grateful for it." He leaned down and kissed me, a soft, lingering kiss that tasted of promises kept and a lifetime to come, a testament to the unexpected rewards of loyalty. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more. Let us know what you thought of Clara and Julian's journey in the comments below.